Labels get a lot of hate. People don't like labels applied to them. People get upset when they are labeled. And labels have a lot to do with power. The thing is, labels can actually be pretty useful. Like, if you have a tin can without a label on it, you have no idea what could be in that can. It could be something nice as chunks of pineapple on a hot summer day, or it could be like tinned meat or something that like you don't want, like a can of potatoes when you're looking for green beans. So labels are necessary in some regards. Labels can also be extremely powerful and extremely powerful tools for helping you connect with those stories that you may have internalized, as well as claim new stories for yourself as you step into your authenticity. So, on this week at the Feathermane Soul Wisdom Show, we're going to go ahead and talk about labels. Why don't you join me? You're listening to Feathermane Soul Wisdom, a podcast designed for people looking to live embodied lives and find their authentic selves. This show is hosted by Kit Kaelstow, body theologian and spiritual mentor. If you're looking to get in touch with your inner spirit, then this show is for you. Thanks for listening. And now, this week's show. Welcome back. I'm Kit Kaelstow, your host for this week's episode of the Feathermane Soul Wisdom Show. Today we're talking about labels. Before I go any further, I want to let you know two things. First, labels are a social construct. Labels will have meaning to one person that will be positive. Another person will use that same label in a negative way. And we see this all the time. You know, a good example is the word nerd. So I'm a nerd. I admit it. I love books. I love studying. I love knowledge. I love geeking out over my favorite subject. It's why me and my spouse get along so well together, because we love geeking out together over our favorite subjects or our favorite TV shows. I willfully embrace the phrase nerd. Just like Will Wheaton, you know, he runs a show called The Ready Room after every episode of Star Trek. And he always starts out with, "Hey, nerds." And we're all like, "Yay, we're nerds." So it's a very powerful label for us. But you know what? When I was going to school, nerd was not a powerful label. Nerd was an insult that was hurled at me because I was too smart, too obnoxious, and too willing to answer questions and say what I thought. I was the first one in any classroom with my hand in the air to answer, and I was the one that the teacher had to say, "Why don't you give somebody else a chance?" Nerd was not a happy label for me when I was a kid. Now that I'm an adult, now that I own the label, now that I have taken the power back, I don't mind being called a nerd at all. Call me a nerd, whatever. And that gets to my second point, and that is labels are about power. Who has the power or who wants the power? And frankly, this is the same thing with every social construct, but that is a very long, very complicated conversation that a lot of people aren't ready for. So when I call myself a nerd, I am reclaiming that word. I am taking the power of that word and I am owning that. I am taking and claiming and standing in my authenticity and in my power. That's why, frankly, some people are really freaked out when you do reclaim those labels. Another one is the word queer. When I call myself queer, I am taking that power back. I am reclaiming that power and I am standing in my own authentic truth. That is where the power lies within those words. If somebody else, say those bullies at school, are calling me a nerd, then they're trying to claim power over me. And that's kind of the key there. Anytime a label is being used against you, the person using that label is trying to claim power or superiority over you. And let me be honest with you, they're wrong. You are a divine being. You are a sovereign being. And nobody has power over you that you don't allow them to have. And so these labels are simply about power. And so, in the interest of helping you reclaim your power, helping you take your power back so you can live that embodied, authentic life that I'm always talking about, we've got to examine some labels. Now, if you want to go without labels, if you want to be unlabeled, that is your prerogative. That is your power to do so. And I applaud you for that. All I'm saying here is that for some of us, we can look at the labels that were applied to us and use that to restore not just our relationship with those labels, but also our relationship with ourselves. So just like anything else I talk about, take what works for you. If something resonates with you, awesome. Go ahead and take that and use that. If you're not feeling this, if this doesn't resonate with you, don't worry. There'll be another show next week and we'll talk again. So let's talk about those labels. One of the things that I have found, and again, I'm always speaking from my point of view. This is what has helped me. I hope it helps you. But again, we're all individuals. We each have to come at this at our own way. Is when I am made uncomfortable by a label, when I am made uncomfortable with something, I have to sit with it and think about why I'm uncomfortable. Now, if you're really triggered or really uncomfortable, it is best to do this in a professional setting or with somebody who really cares about you, who's willing to hold space and provide whatever support you need, whether that's a listening ear, whether that's reassurance, whether that voice is one that can tell you, hey, you've got power here. You can take your power back, or, hey, that was the correct response. You know, depending on what you've gone through, you may need some support in this. But, you know, to think about those labels that were applied to you. And the first question to always ask is it true? And I don't mean that in a negative way, like the nerd label. Is it true that I'm a nerd? Well, yeah. Okay. Why is that person? And then the next question is, why is that person applying that label to you? And generally the answer is some form of you are making them uncomfortable. You are making them aware of where they feel inadequate. You are making them aware of their weaknesses. Usually people who apply labels in a negative way do so because they don't like some aspect of that, and usually because it brings up something within themselves that they don't want to face. So in the case of those bullies, they could have been jealous because I got good grades. They could have been jealous because I appeared to get all the attention from the teachers, because I answered questions in class and engaged with the material. You know, I don't know. I'm not in their head. And I think that's the other part of that to remember. You're not in their head. You can brainstorm some ways that they may have been affected by the label that they're applying to you and reasons why they want to kind of put you down by applying that label, but we're not going to know for sure. And so with those two things, is it true? And why did that label get applied? You can then take the next step, which is, if the label's true, and if it weren't for the people bullying you or the people applying that label to you, you're okay with claiming that in a positive way. Claim that label. Claim that label, turn it right back around. You know, basically say, yeah, I am. What's your problem with that? Because the truth is, there's probably a 99.9% chance you're just going about living your life and doing whatever you're doing when somebody applies this label to you. You're not hurting them. You're not infringing on their rights. You're not denying their humanity. You're just going about your life. And so if you can take your power back out of that story, if you can reclaim your power, I encourage you to do that. Now, if you say, is it true? And you're like, no. And why are they doing that? And you can tell it's because they're trying to deflect or deny. That's called the Darvo response. Deny, accuse, reverse offender, and then make themselves the victim. Again, whole nother conversation. But if they're doing that to try to basically deflect and deny that they are the ones actually acting bad in that situation, then you can just drop the label. That label's not you. That's them having some issues that they need to go work out. Know that those issues have nothing to do with you and just walk away. I know, easier said than done. But the more practice you do that with labels, I assure you, it does get easier. Because the more power you claim within yourself, the more you stand in your authenticity, the more you stand as a fully embodied being, the easier it is to remember that you are not responsible for somebody else's thoughts, actions, or feelings. They are responsible for their thoughts, actions, and feelings. And so this is just kind of a general conversation about labels. So I want to talk about how claiming labels can actually be a very transformative process. The other side of labels is their transformative power. And this happens to a lot of late diagnosed neurodivergent people. But frankly, it can happen to somebody who realizes they are LGBTQIA+ later in life. Or it could even happen if you are dealing with medical symptoms for a long period of time and all of a sudden get a diagnosis. It can happen in other cases too, but those are kind of the big ones. And at that point, those labels can be transformative. And that's where you run into people saying, don't make the label your entire identity. Well, the truth is, that is not a thing. I mean, I talk a lot about being neurodivergent, about being transmasculine, but I guarantee you there's a lot more to me than that. Those are the parts that some people choose to focus on. But I talk about cats and horses and chickens. Oh boy, do I talk about chickens. I live on a farm, I write, I have other interests. You are not a single label. And so I kind of want to preface this with, if you're worried about kind of stepping really into the power of a label, especially one that explains something that you have struggled with for a long period of time, and you're worried that it's going to become your entire identity, don't. The truth is, when you first have that realization, you may talk about it a lot because it's new and it's exciting and it fires all the dopamine receptors in your brain. And you want to share that, hey, I figured this out. And that is perfectly normal and perfectly okay. That is something to do. And in fact, I bet if you connect with other people in those communities, they will cheer you on just as strong. So I feel like a lot of people kind of don't take this step of the transformative power of labels because they're afraid of that. I also want to do a quick disclaimer here. I am a firm believer in self-diagnosis for neurodivergence, especially autism and ADHD, because there are many socioeconomic systemic factors had to do with our culture, have to do with the way that autism is defined in the Diagnostic Standards Manuals, which is used here in the US. There's financial issues. There's trying to find a neurodivergent aware clinician. There's so many factors that it can be very difficult to get an official on paper diagnosis. There are many assessment tests online, and if you connect with the neurodivergent or the autism community especially, we can point you to some. There's some trusted websites. There's also the fact that if you're really starting to feel like a neurodivergent label is applying to you, hey, I've been reading about autism and that sounds like me, or hey, I've been reading about ADHD and that sounds like me, there is an extremely good statistical probable chance that that is you, that you would have meet the criteria for that condition were all the other socioeconomic systemic pieces in place. And while I don't want to break the trans egg prime directive, the truth is that sort of thing also goes for trans. Speaking from personal experience, if you if you always wanted to be the quote unquote opposite sex, although it's not a binary choice, it's a big old 360-degree spectrum. But if you have long not felt comfortable in your body, or imagine what it would like to be different, or start to wonder if this is the case, you might want to chat with somebody. And I say that with as much love and gentleness as possible. For those that aren't aware, the trans egg prime directive is that if you suspect somebody may be trans and not know it themselves, it's really, you should be really careful. And I would say that this would go for like neurodivergence or other conditions as well. You should really not come out and quote unquote diagnose somebody, although I hate that terminology, or tell them, I think you are whatever. You should have them discover that for themselves. You can say, hey, have you looked at this? Have you checked out this? I have found this resource to be really helpful to me. And that would be a gentle way to handle this, no matter what label. But the reason why I list those labels, the neurodivergent ones, and realizing you're trans, queer, LGBTQIA plus later in life, is because for a lot of us, and I'm going to speak kind of primarily to the late diagnosed neurodivergent folk here. You go through life and there are stories, and that's really what drove me into this work, is because there are stories that you internalize, that you're told about yourself, starting when you're a kid in school. And you could go through decades of your life with these stories. And a lot of times these aren't positive, happy, healthy stories, but these are, very bad, negative self-talk. I always mess everything up. Nobody likes me. I can't make friends. I'm weird, and not in a good way. It's phrases like that get built up. And then when you have the realization that a quote unquote label applies to you, once I realized I was AUDHD, and how did I realize that? Well, I have friends who are neurodivergent, and I'm thinking, well, gosh, we're all alike, and so that got me to doing research and really thinking, yeah, this seems like me. And then I took several of those assessments. And, not to brag, but I have always scored very highly on tests. But the scores I was getting on these autism assessments were off the charts. It was like, if you scored this, there's a high likelihood that you are autistic and should speak with somebody. And I would score like well above that mark. So at that point, I pretty much knew. I'm like, there's a really good likelihood here. And again, I have since confirmed this with professionals. And while I don't have anything like in writing, like a diagnosis or something medical that I could use to get accommodations at work, for example, I'm as close to that as you can get. And again, there's many socioeconomic systemic reasons why I don't have that. And frankly, it wouldn't matter at work anyway. But the American Disabilities Act is not helpful for a lot of people. I'll just say that. So the thing is, when you claim those labels, it's like a switch flips in your head, and it may take a while to get there. But like for me, it was like a switch flipped, and it was like, oh, this explains everything. And I am not alone in that response. So many people I talk to in the neurodivergent community have that same response. Oh, this explains everything. And so once you have that explanation, that is a great time to claim that label that fits, that works for you, that you can take power from, and start to get rid of those stories that you had built up that no longer support you, that no longer benefit you, that no longer make sense to you. See, on one hand, it's kind of like down the rabbit hole freaky that everything is a social construct, because then that forces you to think about society and culture and all sorts of stuff. But on the other hand, that means that you can construct that label or that identity to work for you, that you don't have to have somebody else's permission to do that, because it's all a social construct. And before I close this week, I just want to talk a little bit about fads. So a lot of people are saying that it is a fad to claim these labels. No, honey, it's not a fad. What's happening is, much like with many topics, many scientific topics, we could talk about, the deep oceans. Our knowledge of the deep oceans has grown exponentially, say, in the last decade. And I don't even follow that too much. I just watch a lot of documentaries. Our medical knowledge, how we treat such things as cancer, has grown, especially in the last 20 years, exponentially. Some of the ways that we think about various proactive screenings has changed. We are constantly getting new knowledge. And by we, I mean kind of society / culture / whatever fields are involved. Likewise, with autism and ADHD and neurodivergence, what has happened is a lot of those of us who fell through the cracks, a lot of times because we were assigned female at birth, the diagnostic criteria, for example, for autism is extremely narrow and tailored to a very specific presentation. Well, there's a reason why it's called a spectrum, people. And that's because it is an entire range of presentations. Likewise with ADHD. When I was growing up, you thought of ADHD as usually a little boy who couldn't sit still, that was running around and, zip, zip, zip around the room, can't sit still, can't focus. Now, especially for people who were assigned female at birth, ADHD also gets into things that are often diagnosed as anxiety, racing thoughts, inability to focus, all sorts of stuff. And so there's entire generations, and I say generations because it affects millennials as well, who grew up, did not know they were neurodivergent, had kids, and their kids were diagnosed. And then, much like me with my friends, they were like, well, wait a minute, I act exactly like my kid. They seek out information and realize they're neurodivergent as well. It's not a fad. We simply have more knowledge. Likewise, with somebody realizing that they're, LGBTQIA+. When I was growing up, and I'm a young Gen Xer, but when I was growing up, there was no LGBTQIA+. There was lesbian or gay, And I was very fortunate to be in a household where at least I knew those things existed. And it was, from TV, from hearing, parents or caretakers talk about other people they knew. It was that sort of thing. I mean, it wasn't, I was aware they existed, but that was it. It wasn't, again, until I really started having questions and starting to put those pieces together. And for me, it was finding out I was neurodivergent helped me put those pieces together, that I was able to go, oh, that's the word or the language or the phrasing I was looking for. Again, it's not a fad. Culture and society have shifted, and the world has moved on, and a lot of people have learned things, much like the sciences, much like economics. Well, I don't know about economics, but people have learned things and moved forward. And so quite often the people who are calling those a fad don't want society, culture, or you to move forward. They are, again, trying to use that label to hurt, harm, or otherwise try to make themselves feel superior to other people. And so I just want to just kind of put that out there, because I don't want anybody to listen to this podcast, start to do strong self-exploration, and worry that they're giving into a fad. Because you also could do that self-explanation or an exploration and realize, no, there's other reasons for this, because there is so much we don't know. So, and I will say there is strong overlap with the autistic community and other communities, or with the neurodivergent community and other communities. And so there's lots of things that kind of go hand in hand. But as we close up this conversation about labels, I just want to talk about and just basically say the thing to ask about a label is, who is trying to claim the power here and for what reason? And then when you have a label applied to yourself, is it true? And again, why is this person applying this label to you? And can you reclaim the label to give yourself the power? I hope this has been helpful. If you have any questions at all, if you have any concerns at all, I encourage you to please reach out to me if this is something you would like to explore in more detail. I also, would encourage you to book a session with me or hop on a discovery call. Let's work through this together. Let's see how we can help you step in and claim the power of your authentic embodied life together. Thank you for listening. You've been listening to the Feathermane Soul Wisdom Podcast, hosted by Kit Kaelstow. Learn more about Feathermane Soul at feathermanesoul.com. Kit's passionate about embodied living and finding authentic joy by connecting with yourself and others. Kit loves working with neurodivergent, chronically ill, or disabled individuals, as well as anyone who wants to reclaim the stories and find new stories for them. Music is Running with the Horses by Purple Planet Music. This podcast is hosted on the Muse Charmer Media Network. Find out more by visiting the podcast website and following the links to Muse Charmer. Please don't forget to like, subscribe, or follow the podcast at your favorite podcast listening or social media site. Thank you.